and welcome to Morning Joe. It's only Thursday, November 7th, Joe. Kind of feels
I thought
like
yesterday was Friday, right? I thought it was like, okay, end of the week. Yeah. Well, no, it was a great. I thought it was a great speech by Kamala Harris. I thought she obviously, for good reasons, is still sort of in that campaign mode, and obviously, though she again, I think she hit the marks throughout the campaign and did extremely well. I think she did far better than most people expected her to do at the beginning of that very short and abbreviated campaign. It was such an extraordinarily short and abbreviated campaign. And in the states, you know, you look at, there are a lot of things to look at across the map that you see states like Texas and Florida and Ohio. Those have just gone so deeply red compared to even where they were 4 years ago when Joe Biden was getting closer, certainly in Texas and within 3 or 4 in Florida. But those states are deep red. Ohio, a deep red. Pennsylvania, the party registration has gotten far more Republican over the last several years. The races were still close, though, Willie, in Wisconsin, still close in Michigan. Pennsylvania was more like 2 percentage points. We had Democrats winning Wisconsin and Detroit and Michigan yesterday. Pennsylvania's still up in the air right now, but that's looking like that's going to go to Dave McCormick, but it's still very close. But there were such transformational changes in this race yesterday. And, you know, Jonathan asked at the end of his show, where should Democrats go from here? I'd suggest France for a couple of weeks and think it over. 32% of Americans, only 32% of Americans who voted identified themselves as Democrats. Donald Trump won, if I'm not mistaken, I think I saw this on Mike Allen's newsletter, 1 of 3 votes from people of color. And Donald Trump has put together a working class coalition across racial lines that nobody has done in this country in over 50 years. And so, yes, people need to look back at the campaign. And they certainly should feel free to call out Donald Trump for all the things that he said that were shocking and deeply offensive. But if you're a Democrat right now and think that's going to get you elected 4 years from now, it didn't get you elected a couple of nights ago. So it's time for the Democrats to look in the mirror and figure out exactly what went wrong. And I think, Willie, you and I have been talking about it over the last 4 years or so. It shouldn't be really that hard for them to figure out exactly where they went wrong. We'll just see if they're self-aware enough to do it.
Yeah, I mean, this is a massive structural problem now for the Democratic Party. So there's been all this sort of Monday morning quarterbacking about the vice presidential choice and all these things that we traditionally hear. That would not have made a difference. Let's be clear about that. About the shortened campaign, that, of course, was difficult. Kamala Harris didn't have time to introduce herself in a way that, say, Barack Obama did. But the fact of the matter is Donald Trump just wiped out the Democratic Party. You sometimes, as a political opponent, as you know, Joe, you just have to tip your cap to the other side, not for the rhetoric, not for the behavior, but for the way he won. The people he brought into his party, the people who felt they didn't have a home, Latino men, some young black men as well, even women, young people. He did much better with young people than most people expected. And that is a big shift that the Democratic Party has to reckon with. And at this moment, I'm not sure what the way back is for Democrats when you've been wiped out. Donald Trump did better in 48 of the 50 states than he did last time around, despite all the everything that was coming at him. So Democrats need to sit and think about what happened. The question will be, do they have the will to change? Do they have a message that will be appealing to those people that Donald Trump now brought into his coalition?
I hate Monday morning quarterbacking here. I really do. And I don't want this to be taken as a blanket criticism for the people that were running Kamala Harris's campaign, because they were great. Jen O'Malley Dillon, just the best on the ground that there is. She was facing, though, there was a red wave this year.
Yeah.
The press got it wrong and the pollsters got it wrong 2 years ago. That wave was somewhere out coming off of Africa and moving across the Atlantic and coming. It just took it 2 years more to get here. But, man, it crashed on shore two nights ago. But, Jonathan Lemire, there was some reluctance to go there, to talk about the things that were concerning Americans that really mattered this year. Illegal immigration, the mass border crossings. Yes, they put a bill out there, and yes, that was good. But there wasn't anything more definitive on it than that. That was something that concerned Hispanic voters. It's something that concerned black voters. That concerned something that concerned all voters. We will talk again. We've been talking about the transgender ad that we kept talking about on this show. 30,000 times it ran, over $30 million, and kept talking about it, saying this is going to be a problem in the 3 states that you need. There's a Financial Times article. They don't understand my life. The Trump campaign spent millions. This is Financial Times. Trump campaign spent millions of dollars on political ads focusing on transgender issues in the final stretch of the race. Kamala is for they, them, one said. Trump is for you. Quote, the ads on the transgender stuff were really unsettling to the people, said Deb Dassow, chair of the Democratic Party in Wisconsin's Ozaukee County, a Republican stronghold in the Milwaukee suburbs that broke for Trump. I mean, you don't have to be a Republican, though I was a Republican. You don't have to be a conservative, though I was a conservative, to understand that seeing ad after ad after ad in NFL football games saying that taxpayers were going to be funding transgender surgeries for inmates, it's not something that's going to play well in Wisconsin, in Michigan, in Pennsylvania, among men. Mm-hmm. And yet they just didn't respond to it because they were afraid to respond to it because it might offend some small subset of their base. And the thing is, nobody's saying to be anything but kind to all Americans. This just had to do with responding to the ad and saying, hey, wait a second, that was Donald Trump's policy that they're attacking. But they wouldn't even do that because, again, they're afraid to offend, always afraid to offend, always afraid to offend on border security, always afraid to offend on so many other issues. They're at 32%, and they have lost working class America. The question is, how long until they understand that this isn't just about tax cuts. This isn't just about economics. This is about cultural markers that matter greatly in these people's lives.
Yeah, this is certainly a lot of second guessing among Democrats that they should have had a more robust response to that particular argument. There's a lot of finger pointing in the party right now. But let's be clear. The President Biden's legislative record robust, but they're even in real time. His West Wing acknowledged they were slow to address 2 issues: immigration and inflation. And they feel like they made progress on both, but that was a lasting impression made on voters, and Republicans hammered it home. There's also a similarity here to what we saw in 2016, the first time Donald Trump was reelected, where he appealed to these working class voters who felt like then it was the recovery from the Great Recession, this time around the recovery from the pandemic and the resulting inflation, that they felt it was uneven. They felt it was unfair. The elites continued to do well, but the working class suffered, and we saw that at the ballot box here. Not only did Trump continue to do really well with white working class voters, he made real inroads with Latino voters, as we discussed at length yesterday, a little bit with black voters. He also made modest gains in the suburbs. It was across the board. It wasn't just 48 out of 50 states that he did well in, as Willie mentioned. He improved his marks in more than 90% of the nation's counties. This was across the board, the victory here for Republicans. And for Mika, as for Democrats, Kamala Harris received about 14 million fewer votes than Joe Biden did 4 years ago. That is a staggering number. And they have a lot of figuring out to do. And that process begins right now to how to rebuild a coalition that seems to be badly fractured.
Yeah, and I think, another part of this, just to not make it exactly everything the Democrats did was wrong, I think there was a ton of disinformation out there. I heard a segment at the end of your show how she needed to separate herself more from Joe Biden because he was so unpopular. Why was he so unpopular? Was his presidency a failure? Can I have an answer on that? Was his presidency a failure, Gene?
No, it was not a failure.
Right.
Actually, it was a very successful presidency,
right.
in my opinion.
So
yeah, right. Look, there will be a whole lot of lessons, I think, for the Democratic Party to learn from this election. I think they might take Joe's advice and go into the trip to France phase for the next couple of weeks, and then really go into the numbers. Why did so many fewer people bother to vote this time? Right. Not just for hair, but the overall vote totals are lower, and a lot of people didn't show up. That surprised me. And so why was that?
I spoke to people who were canvassing in all the different swing states, some people I knew really well, and they were stunned at how disinformed people were that they were talking to. They were just stunned at what they were saying because it was just beyond even close to the truth. So that's a big part of this. It's not all of it. And Joe, I know we need to get to our other guests, but I just think if we have to, obviously there's a lot of questions that's going to be asked and looked into and really legitimate reasons to look within, for sure.
Right.
At the same time, the landscape is a sea of voices and websites and places to go for information that is simply not true and then is backed up again and again and again and again until it becomes narrative.
You fight on the battlefield that is before you. And so if there is disinformation on the battlefield that is before you, you can run off of that battlefield screeching and crying with your arms thrown up in the air, or you can figure out how to engage in that battlefield and win. It's that simple. And I understand there is a ton of disinformation out there, and it is sickening. I understand that. I also understand the disinformation will only be worse 4 years from now. So the question is, what will Democrats or what will independents or what will Republicans who don't support an authoritarian version of government, what are they going to do right now instead of complaining? Because complaining doesn't get there. Gene,
totally agree.
We showed the numbers. Gene, put the if you can, TJ, put the numbers up of the number of people who voted again, if you will, TJ. You know, right now, Donald Trump sitting at 72 million. I suppose that number will go up as more votes come in from California. But I guess he's probably not going to reach his vote total from last time, which was 77 million. He had 77 million votes last year and still lost, which means a ton of people. Over 10 million people stayed home who voted for the Democrat last time. Over 15 million people stayed home who voted for the Democrat last time. And Gene, reports out of Detroit, reports out of Philadelphia, that the numbers, especially for black voters, were way down. And when we talked to Reverend Al about a week before, he talked about how when he was canvassing in Detroit, there just wasn't the excitement among black voters for this Democratic ticket.
Yeah, there wasn't. And so why was that? And the answer has to be that